accidents.
You're HIV positive.
What?
You're applying to be an A&E nurse, and you're HIV positive.
New emergencies.
What if we have a major RTA?
That's an extreme situation.
Then this is an extreme department, Adam.
A brand new series of Casualty. Coming soon to BBC One.
Now on BBC One, an update on tonight's National Lottery draw and Thunderball draw. The 6 winning numbers for the main draw are confirmed as 3, 5, 7, 10, 14, 20, and the bonus is 16. Early indications show that there are 16 jackpot winners tonight, each winning £625,000. The National Lottery Thunderball draw numbers are confirmed as 9, 17, 18, 24, 33, and the Thunderball is also number 9. The contestant phone lines have now closed.
Want to know how to live to be 100?
The answer is get out or get on. I never eat meat.
I only sleep 2 hours at night.
100 Years Young. Tuesday at 10 on BBC One.
For over 8 million of us, the simplest, most harmless substances can make life a misery.
I think there's nothing anyone can do for me. I'm a lost cause, really.
Catching the causes
He mustn't eat nuts.
and testing the treatments
Test this out and see what we can do to get you better.
of society's new itch.
And I get felled by a snail.
The everyday stories of everyday people winning the battle against Britain's epidemic. Allergy Alert starts Tuesday at 8:30 on BBC One.
Now on BBC One, the BBC News and Sport with Fiona Bruce and Rob Bonnet.
Anarchy in East Timor as the people vote for independence from Indonesia. The militias take to the streets while the government pleads for peace. Police searching for Laura Kane find a child's body. A man's been arrested. And a hat-trick for Shearer as England knocked Luxembourg for 6. Good evening. There are fears tonight that East Timor is on the brink of civil war after nearly 80% of its people voted for independence from Indonesia. Militia groups opposed to independence have taken to the streets, brandishing guns and machetes. An American member of the United Nations mission there has been shot, and it's reported that parts of East Timor's capital, Dili, have been set on fire. The Indonesian military are said to be orchestrating the violence, despite the country's president appealing for peace from the capital, Jakarta. From there, David Shukman reports.
Relief and celebration in East Timor this morning. The vote for independence was overwhelming. An end is in sight to the years of often brutal occupation by Indonesia. The United Nations announced the results. In effect, a new country is being born.
After 24 years of conflict, East Timor now stands on the threshold of what we all hope will be a process of orderly and peaceful transition towards independence.
But the transition is far from orderly. This militiaman brandished a gun outside the hotel where UN officials and journalists are staying. Shots were fired. Militiamen like this one are furious at the referendum and its result. They do not want East Timor to be independent. Far worse scenes are reported beyond the view of the cameras. This image shows the scale of the problems. Militiamen chatting to the policemen who were meant to be controlling them. The military authorities say they're cracking down, but we can all see that they aren't. And tonight they even denied there was a problem.
There is no report that the militia are carrying guns and walking on the street. There is no people walking on the street carrying guns illegally.
Indonesia's President, B.J. Habibie, invited in the British and American ambassadors today. He tried to reassure them that the violence would be contained, but he admitted that many Indonesians were bitter about losing East Timor. All eyes are now on the man likely to lead the new East Timor, Xanana Gusmao, allowed out of house arrest briefly with a full release next week. So here in the capital, Jakarta, tonight, the government is more or less resigned to allowing East Timor to break away. It will, after all, help Indonesia's image internationally. But within the military, there's downright opposition and a risk that army commanders will stoke up further violence. The people of East Timor may have voted for independence today, but they're a long way from securing peace. David Shukman, BBC News in Jakarta.
A short time ago, I spoke to our correspondent, Jonathan Head, in Jakarta, and asked him how bad the situation in East Timor is tonight.
It's got a lot worse almost by the hour. I think for the United Nations, even though they expected a bad reaction to this result from those hardline opponents of independence, they were probably very disappointed by the extreme violence that has taken place today. We've seen militias moving into new towns, taking over at least 5 towns and driving the United Nations staff out. The UN's had to evacuate its staff. It's had one American police officer shot in the stomach. All the time, the Indonesian security forces just stood by and let them run rampage. It's almost as though this is an organized attempt to subvert the free and democratic choice that was made so courageously by the people of East Timor earlier this week.
And is this an organised attempt by the government, then? What's the reaction of the government in Jakarta to the vote?
The government itself appears to be very committed to it. It was President Habibie was very, very quick to accept the results of the vote. We've got the government offering even to release the jailed East Timorese rebel leader, Xanana Gusmao, early next week and get him back to East Timor, where he could play a vital role in reconciling the two sides. The trouble is, increasingly, as we've seen over the past few days, what the government says in Jakarta and what its military does on the ground are two entirely different things. Very, very sad for East Timor, which had had such hope earlier this week.
If the military are going it alone, then, does Indonesia need international support to try to bring the military back under control?
The next stage, obviously, for the international community to consider is sanctions against the government and trying to force peacekeepers in. Those are very difficult issues to address, but it may come to that if the military is determined to sabotage this referendum. We didn't think it would go this far. We thought the military would, in the end, back down and accept the inevitable. So far, to the great cost of the East Timorese people, we're seeing the beginnings of a civil war that is being artificially generated by a military that refuses to let go.
Jonathan Head in Jakarta, thanks very much. A man's been arrested following the discovery earlier today of the body of a young girl, believed to be the missing 9-year-old Laura Kane. Police found the body at a house in Merton, about 10 miles from Laura's home in Penshaw in Tyne and Wear. They've now called off their search.
Police moved into a house on this large council estate this morning, the 10th day of their search for the missing girl. A man was arrested, and before the discovery was announced publicly, forensic teams were sent into the house to examine it thoroughly. Laura Kane disappeared from her home last Wednesday week, telling her mother she was off to play with friends. Northumbria Police launched a widespread search. Volunteers combed fields around Laura's home village of Penshaw, while divers checked local ponds and rivers. Laura's mother, Carol, made an emotional appeal for information, but during the 10-day search, detectives only had 3 sightings of Laura to work on. Tonight, in the village of Merton, 10 miles from Laura's home in Penshaw, neighbours on the housing estate laid flowers outside the house where the body had been discovered. This long search for the missing girl deeply affected many communities across this part of the northeast. The discovery of a child's body here ended a huge 10-day police operation across Wearside and County Durham. Detectives are expected to question the man they arrested throughout the weekend. John Thorne, BBC News, Merton, County Durham.
The Ulster Unionists and Sinn Féin have both said that they will take part in the next stage of the peace process. The parties each met today to finalise their strategies for the review of the Good Friday Agreement, which begins on Monday under the chairmanship of the former American Senator George Mitchell.
Morning. The Ulster Unionists gathered today to finalise their approach to the Mitchell review. They've decided that there must be a commitment from what they call Sinn Féin IRA to peace and democracy if the review is to make any progress.
Deep scepticism was expressed by a number of delegates about the prospects for that in view of the way in which paramilitaries have made it very clear that they don't have a commitment, a genuine commitment to peaceful means.
And a number of Ulster Unionists would not believe Sinn Féin anyway if they heard otherwise. There's very little optimism here that the Mitchell review will make matters any better, but Mr Trimble will meet the Senator on Monday to lay out his party's position. What he will not do, and probably for some considerable time, is meet any members of Sinn Féin. In Dublin, Sinn Féin's president Gerry Adams told his party's executive it was time for taking risks and showing leadership by playing a full part in the review. But there was little sign here either of healing rifts.
We need to focus on the parts of the agreement that are in default and those who have brought it into default. And any objective reading or overview of the situation would clearly point in the direction of both the British government and the Ulster unions.
The culture of blame, though, will not wash with the man called upon to turn this peace process around.
History might have forgiven the failure to reach an agreement, since few thought it possible. History will never forgive the failure to implement an agreement once reached.
There was a funeral in Belfast today for Brian McKinney, murdered by the IRA 21 years ago. One of the so-called disappeared, his remains were finally traced just last month. A poignant reminder of what's at stake as the politicians here embark on potentially the last chance for the Good Friday Agreement. David Eads, BBC News, Belfast.
The Israelis and Palestinians are due to sign a long-awaited agreement tonight in Egypt to start implementing last year's Wye River Peace Accord. It calls for Israeli troop withdrawals from the West Bank, the release of 350 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, and sets a timetable for negotiations on a final settlement.
Against Sinai's rugged backdrop, a summit with lofty ambitions. 2 days later than planned and hundreds of miles away from the original venue, the leaders and their retinues arrive for a meeting designed to breathe new life into the Middle East peace process. Yasser Arafat is here, weary after weeks of tortured negotiations, reassured perhaps by Egypt's President Mubarak that this is the best he can expect. Jordan's King Abdullah is the evening's surprise guest. Picking up the mantle of his father, the late King Hussein, Abdullah seems anxious to play his part in the search for peace. Once the deal is signed, Israeli troops must resume the handover of West Bank territory agreed in last year's Wye River Memorandum. The process began well enough, but soon ground to a halt. Now the two sides are speaking of a new era of cooperation. Troops should start moving within days. Also expected, the first of 2 prisoner releases. Disagreement over this issue prevented the signing of an agreement on Thursday. Fresh from talks in Syria and Lebanon, the US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has arrived to witness an agreement she helped to broker. Calling herself the handmaiden, Mrs. Albright has been forced to negotiate. US involvement, it seems, remains critical. This summit and the signing of another in a long line of peace agreements does at least set the clock ticking once more. But for real success, the pace of diplomacy will need to be nothing short of miraculous. The two sides have given themselves just 12 months to resolve all the remaining issues which divide them. It's a tall, some would say, an impossible order. Paul Adams, BBC News, Sharm el-Sheikh.
A 15-year-old girl has come forward as the mother of a baby boy left on a doorstep in Hull last week. Police say she contacted a maternity hospital nearby and said she was his mother. The baby, called Christopher by hospital staff, is now being looked after by foster parents. 2 men are still in intensive care after a light aircraft crashed near Glasgow airport yesterday, killing 8 people. A 3rd man is said to be stable. The plane was taking Air Tours staff to Aberdeen to join a holiday flight to Mallorca.
All day, air accident investigators have been working in the field a few miles from Glasgow airport, where the remains of the Cessna 404 are scattered. Just 5 minutes into the flight to Aberdeen, the plane had radioed that it had a problem. It nosedived and burst into flames. The pilot, John Eason, was amongst the dead. He ran the charter company which operated the flight. The investigators expect their job here to last some days.
It's quite a painstaking process. They're looking at every piece of evidence at the scene. They're just working their way through that.
At the Southern General Hospital in Glasgow, the 3 survivors, all employees of the Air Tours travel company, are being treated. 2 are in intensive care.
Both were in a serious condition and underwent immediate emergency surgery. One had sustained spinal and internal injuries, the other spinal, pelvic and leg injuries, together with serious burns.
One of the plane's engines was spluttering before it crashed, according to a witness. The Cessna wasn't equipped with a flight recorder, and this will make the work of the investigators more difficult, as they try to establish why this aircraft came down. June Kelly, BBC News.
A 3-day eventer has been killed while competing in the Burghley horse trials. Simon Long, who was 38, died when his horse fell on him. He's the 4th eventer to be killed in competition since May. And now with news of how the home nations got on in today's European Championship qualifiers and the rest of the day's sport. Here's Rob Bonnet.
Well, as expected, England had a comfortable afternoon at Wembley against Luxembourg, beating them by 6 goals to 0. There was a hat-trick for Alan Shearer, but more importantly, England are now second in Group 5 behind Sweden, who defeated Bulgaria today 1-0. A draw against Poland next week might be enough, but if England can win in Warsaw, then they'll definitely qualify for the runners-up playoffs for the Euro 2000 finals.
There were plenty who argued that in his present form, Alan Shearer shouldn't even be playing for England, let alone leading them out. But Kevin Keegan's faith in his captain was about to be handsomely repaid. So too was his boldness in giving 20-year-old Kieran Dyer his debut. The Newcastle youngster was a revelation, and it was he who won England a penalty after only 11 minutes. Shearer not only dispatched it with his customary authority, but soon after announced that his power and predatory instincts had not deserted him. Just 2 minutes later, and Steve McManaman benefited from his captain's feint to score an overdue first international goal. Then Dyer's elusiveness and persistence again created the opening for Shearer to complete a sweetly timed hat-trick. By the time McManaman got his second, England, 5 up, were threatening a score better than the cricket team's average opening partnership. But the second half was comparatively flat, until just before the end, when Michael Owen delivered the 6th and the best. Poland next Wednesday, though, will be an entirely different proposition, and England really have to beat them to have a chance of qualifying via the playoffs. That's because Sweden effectively guaranteed victory in the group by outclassing Bulgaria at home, even though they only won 1-0, with the winner coming from Nicholas Alexanderson. Kevin Geary, BBC News.
And Scotland have just beaten Bosnia 2-1 in Sarajevo. First half goals from Don Hutchison and Billy Dodds secured the win, which keeps them well in contention for second place in Group 9.
The adventurous team selection by Scotland's coach Craig Brown was vindicated after just 13 minutes. John Collins's corner met powerfully by Billy Dodds, Don Hutchison on hand to scoop up the leftovers from the keeper's save. But 10 minutes later the lead was cancelled out when Bolic was set free with only Wimbledon's Neil Sullivan to beat. The striker, who plays his club football in Turkey, showed the scoring instinct that has earned him almost a goal a game in his national colours. Although Bosnia then began to look the more accomplished side, Scotland regained the lead just before half-time, thanks to Billy Dodds, who single-handed first fashioned an opening and then combined power and accuracy with a shot to complete a goal of true international class. After the break, Bosnia pressed hard for the equaliser, but clear chances were virtually non-existent, and Scotland's defence remained solid. With just a couple of minutes to go, their lead was intact, and their chances of qualification next year massively boosted. Steve McCormack, BBC News.
And Wales' Mark Hughes has had the perfect start to his career in international management, though his team had to come from behind for their Group 1 win in Minsk. Vasily Baranov scoring for Belarus after 28 minutes. Wales equalised just before half-time from a corner. Gary Speed's shot was fumbled, and Dean Saunders followed up to put away the rebound. The winner came just 3 minutes from the end with a close-range Ryan Giggs header. Wales' 2-1 victory keeps alive their chances of qualifying for Euro 2000 via the runners-up playoffs. But Northern Ireland can no longer qualify for the finals after losing 3-0 to Turkey in Belfast. The Turkish striker Arif Erdan scoring a hat-trick. Well, the 100 metres world champion Maurice Greene of the USA was hard-pressed to beat Britain's best sprinters in the international athletics match in Glasgow today. Greene, fresh from his 2 individual goals at the World Championships in Seville, was pushed all the way by Darren Campbell, eventually beating him by just 0.03 of a second. Dwayne Chambers, bronze medalist in Seville, was third. The USA won the match itself by 171 points to 143. The 13-8 favourite Dictat won the big race of the day, the Sprint Cup at Haydock Park. The colt, ridden by Frankie Dettori, had much to do with a furlong to go. Jim McGrath describes the closing stages.
Dictat is full of running, gets the opening now, and is coming home like a train on the near side. Bertolini in front, Dictat flying, and Dictat gets up for a big win. Second Bertolini, third Arcadian Hero.
Britain's Lee Westwood holds a 1-stroke lead going into the final round of the European Open in Crans-sur-Sierre, Switzerland. He opened with this eagle on the first and made 4 further birdies to card a 4-under par 67. He's now 8 under for the tournament, 1 shot clear of Thomas Bjorn. Finally tennis, and Andre Agassi, the firm favourite for the men's singles title at the US Open in New York, leads Justin Gimelstob in his 3rd round match by 2 sets to 1. Fiona.
Thanks, Rob. The main news tonight. As 80% of the population of East Timor vote for independence from Indonesia, there are fears of a descent into civil war as militia groups opposed to independence take to the streets, brandishing guns and machetes. That's all from the newsroom tonight. Good night.
Sir David Frost is back for breakfast at the new time of 9 o'clock tomorrow morning on BBC One, when Bobby Robson gives us black and white on his appointment at St James's Park.
Good evening. Some more of this to come tomorrow across England and Wales. The sunniest resort today was Morecambe in Lancashire, which enjoyed just over 12.5 hours of sunshine, and the hot spot, Southampton on the south coast, where the temperature got up to 29 Celsius, which is 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, the hot weather isn't going to last, I'm afraid. Somewhat cooler conditions moving in next week. You can see how the orange colours disappear and this cooler, fresher air moves in off the Atlantic. But in the meantime, tonight, underneath clear skies, a little bit of mist and fog forming. Rather cloudier skies for the west coast of Scotland and Northern Ireland, a little bit of drizzly rain there, and also a very humid night across the province. The temperature 16 Celsius, 61 Fahrenheit. Now, the mist and fog should get out of the way fairly quickly tomorrow. We'll keep that drizzly rain across the western half of Northern Ireland, up the west coast of Scotland, and later on moving into Shetland. In the southeastern corner of England, perhaps a few rumbles of thunder, a 30% chance of that happening. A little bit further to the west and to the north, just a 10% chance of a shower.
And there's a 5-day weather forecast in over 100 towns and cities here in the UK on BBC Online. Go to www.bbc.co.uk/weather.